So a little bit of information about this evening whilst we just sort of sit here. My name's Frances, obviously. I've set this up this evening. This is our second year of running a Getting Into Publishing evening. Last year we ran one actually in the office, and it was just shy of 30 people came in, and they got to sort of walk around the office and actually talk to people individually. And it was a really great experience. We had some fantastic feedback. We all really enjoyed it ourselves. And it just felt like a really great thing to do, to be able to sort of talk to a lot more people about how publishing works. Come this year, and times have obviously changed. So we've taken this to Zoom, and in a way it feels like a real positive. Now, you know, we've had over 400 of you sign up for this evening, which is just so great that actually we get to talk to a lot more people this time round. So yeah, there's something actually quite good come out of this. The structure of the evening is going to be that, first of all, Kate, who's our MD, Kate Wilson, is going to do a brief introduction to sort of Nosy Crow and sort of children's publishing as a whole. And then we're going to move on to the panelists. So we've got representatives from all of our different departments coming, and well, most of our departments coming, and they're all going to have a short presentation, and then there'll be a chance for you to ask questions. So I am going to invite Kate to be our first panelist who's going to talk to you about Nosy Crow.
Hi, does that work?
Yep, you are good.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm Kate Wilson, I'm the Managing Director of Nosy Crow. We don't know we don't know who you are, and we don't know how much you know. I do hope you'll find this evening useful. I thought it would be helpful to start just with a very quick introduction to Nosy Crow, though the fact that you're here means that I suspect you probably know a bit about it. Nosy Crow is many things. It's award-winning, and last night at the British Book Awards, otherwise known as the Nibbies because of the shape of the award that you get, we won Independent Publisher of the Year, and we also won an award for our export sales. We've also been named twice Children's Publisher of the Year, so we must be doing something right. We're independent. That means that we're not owned by either a venture capital company, so kind of big money, and we're not a big corporate. In fact, we're relatively small. There are 50 of us who would usually be working in our offices near London Bridge. We're all working from home at the moment, and we have turnover of about £20 million we're expecting this year, which will be a little bit up, we think, on next year, but obviously it's very hard to tell because of the coronavirus crisis, which I will also be mentioning. We're newish. We've been going for 10 years. It was set up by me, by our editorial director, Camilla Reed, and by Adrian Soar, who is the commercial director. In 2010, we started publishing in 2011. So we're coming to the end of our 10th year of publishing. We're specialists. We only publish children's books. And when I talk about children's books, I mean everything from books for babies and toddlers, like this one, which has got moving parts, and this one, which has got a flap made of cloth, made of felt, so something like that, through to non-fiction, Making a Baby, which I guess, so those were books for kind of 1-year-olds, through to Making a Baby, which might work for a child between the ages of 8 and maybe 12, and a book like Her Story, again 8 to 12, and then we've got some fiction titles. Here's an example, The Longest Night of Charlie Noon, again, which I think is probably 9 to 12 really in terms of its interest and reading level. So we're publishing those books, and then books that are kind of come in between, so something like Look What I Found in the Woods, which is a non-fiction book encouraging children to discover what they can find in the natural environment, or a picture book, When a Dragon Goes to School. You can see that one here. So we're publishing a really wide range of books, but they are all children's books. And we don't publish young adult, we don't publish teen fiction. And of course, that means that my perspective on the industry is a bit driven by the things that I know about. But once, if you are interested in getting into publishing, once I was like you, and I got into publishing because I love books and I wanted to be an editor, I thought that it would be great to be a poetry editor for Faber and Faber. Actually, I ended up working for Faber and Faber as my first job, but I ended up in a different area of publishing altogether. And I discovered that good and beautiful books were not really all that publishing was about. Yes, you have to make good and beautiful books, but they have to sell. And publishing is a commercial business. The government doesn't support us in the way that they would support theatre, for example. It's a commercial business. It stands or falls, publishing companies stand or fall by their ability to sell the books that they publish. So understanding your reader is critical. And in the case of children's books, it's really important to think about the fact that you've got two layers of consumer. You've got your reader, your ultimate reader, the child, you know, the 2-year-old or 1-year-old who might love this, the 5-year-old who might love that. But you've also got to think about the adult who will buy the book for that child, because tragically there are very few 2-year-olds who've got $6.99 to spare. So you have to persuade a parent or a carer or a teacher or a librarian that that's the right book for a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old or whatever. You've also got to think about, and that 2 layers means that children's is different from adult publishing, of course, because in the case of adult publishing, you're appealing to an adult who is probably both your consumer, your buyer, and also your reader. You're also having to think about your customer. So most publishing companies don't do very much, some do, but not very many publishing companies do business directly with consumers. Most of us are selling to somebody else before that person sells on at least one remove away to a consumer, to a parent or a librarian or a teacher. That means you have to understand your customer too. So we're talking about understanding Asda or small upscale independent bookshop in Bath, for example, and they would require very different things from you, very different kinds of books and very different kinds of approaches, very different kinds of selling models. And you might be selling things to a Chinese publisher or a French publisher, and again, their tastes might be really different because you might be trying to sell rights. So publishing is about books, but it's also very much about business. It's about selling. We have to make a profit, and a profit is the difference between the cost of making a book and the price that we can sell it for. And all of these things mean that publishing is a complicated business. When I thought about publishing, I thought only about editorial, but the whole point of this evening is to say that there's lots of different bits of publishing, and you'll have a chance to meet lots of different departments. So that's a kind of overview of what this evening is and how it will work. I thought it might be sensible, and I'm aware I'm maybe running a bit out of time, but and I will come back at the end and answer questions if that would be useful. It's worth just having a quick look at the market. 2019, which is the last year obviously for which we have full figures, was the 5th consecutive year of growth for print book publishing in the UK. The average price was up, and volume, so the number of books sold, and also the value of that, of all of those sales, that was up too. Adult fiction had fallen a little bit, and a lot of adult fiction now is sold in the form of ebooks. Adult non-fiction in terms of print grew, and it was at its highest since 2010. The children's market was pretty flat on 2018, so the value was up a bit and the volume was down a bit, and they balanced each other out. And honestly, it's been pretty flat for the last 4 years at about £285 million worth of children's books being sold in the UK every year. We represent about 1 and a bit percent of that market, 1.6% of that market as Nosy Crow. And the top 10 children's book publishers represent almost 90% of the sales made. The UK is very important to us, and the figures that are visible to us are at the UK, but actually only 1/3 of Nosy Crow's business comes from the UK. I mentioned at the very beginning we'd won a prize for export. That's selling our copies of our books, our edition of the books in English throughout the world, but we also do a lot of rights and co-edition selling. And Michaela, who I think is speaking at 7, will talk to you about this very key part of our business. So children's has broadly, as a market, been altogether flat. Our own growth has been very considerable actually over those 4 years when the business has remained flat. So we've gained market share. So we've got more of the available pie, if you like. We've seen children's non-fiction grow particularly over the last year, but we've also seen growth in the preschool area. So books like this and books like that are growing faster than books like that. So I thought that would be quite useful. But that was 2019, and of course everything has changed. In market terms, I think the key thing that's changed, of course, is the coronavirus crisis and the lockdown that we've been under since towards the end of March. It's not, it doesn't appear to be, in terms of consumer attitudes, all bad. In fact, according to Nielsen BookScan, 41% of people have said that they're reading more in the course of the lockdown, and 33% said that they were doing the same, while 26% of people said that they were reading less or that they were never reading in the first place. And 33% of people said that they were reading to children more, and that includes people who don't have kids. So actually parents are reading a lot more to children, we know that. And 29% of people said that they were reading the same, 38% saying they read less or that they didn't read to children at all, perhaps because they don't have children in their household. And the amount of hours that adults are spending reading has gone up from 3.4 hours a week to 2.7 hours a week. A quarter of adults are reporting they're buying more books in lockdown, and that it's interesting to look at what they're buying. So for kids, for example, they're buying funny stories. They're buying books that help their kids do their schoolwork, and they're buying books that encourage activities. So perhaps drawing, colouring in, or model making books, for example. The things they're not buying are paranormal and horror books and dystopian books. So I think perhaps we all feel that there's enough of that in the real world. More worryingly, I think, for the high street, 44% of people said that they were using Amazon more to buy books. And only 12% said that they were buying books from other online booksellers. And lots of small booksellers don't really have a way of supplying people with online orders. It's worth saying that 41% of people are saying that whatever they're doing in lockdown in terms of enhanced reading is something that they will continue into the future. Only 34% of people said that they were likely to revert to their old habits, and 25% of people said they weren't sure. Of parents, 67%, that's 2/3 of the people who were asked by Nielsen, said they'd keep up reading more to kids, and 28% said they'd revert to their normal level, and only 5% of people said that they weren't sure. So I think that there is an interesting question about what will happen as a result of the coronavirus crisis, whether it will be problematic for the market, because of course high street bookstores have been under huge pressure, but it may be that it has reawakened an appetite for reading in adults, and in adults to for sharing books with children. The other, I think, key thing that we're seeing happening over the last few months has been the focus on Black Lives Matter. Everyone you will see speaking to you tonight is white, and that is a problem for Nosy Crow. It's a problem for the industry in general. And one of the reasons for running an event like this, in fact, is to demystify the business and to try to make it more attractive to a more diverse range of people. We can talk more specifically about what Nosy Crow is doing about that if you would like in Q&As. And we're still formulating some of our responses to it, though obviously some of them are things that we've been thinking about for some time. But I think that that's another important thing that we are thinking about and talking about in the course of lockdown, and I hope beyond. So, right, so somebody said diverse people are applying for publishing jobs, they just aren't getting through the door. We advertise with Creative Access and we advertise widely, and we are not seeing as many applicants from diverse backgrounds as we would like to see. And the purpose of running an event like this is to encourage people to see that there are a very wide range of roles within the industry, and to demystify it, as I say, and to make sure that we're not drawing from the same pool all the time. Does anyone, so that was a question that came up in chat.
Yeah.
Francis, do you want to ask any other questions, or do you want to move straight on?
No, I think for now it'd be best if we moved on to the speakers, and then if you come back at the end, Kate, there might be some more questions.
I will come back at the end.
That sounds all right. Okay. Thanks so much, Kate. That was fantastic. Right. Okay, hello everyone. So our first speaker is going to be Fiona, she's a senior editor here at Nosy Crow. She works on our fiction list. I'm just going to make her a panelist. And she should be joining us in a second. Hello, Fee.
Okay.
Hey, Fee. So,
that's okay.
The floor is yours.
Cool. So, yes, I'm an editor, and there are lots of different types of editors, even within children's publishing. So, it depends on the department that you work in, the kind of role that you'll be performing. So, for instance, you could be working in Novelty, where you'll probably be creating the text yourself, and working very closely with the designer to create like the novelty elements and the spreads and the artwork. It's a very different kind of role to what I do. That's one element of it. You could be working in picture books, where you will similarly have a very close role with the designer, and you'll be probably working with an author more likely than writing the words yourself. But you'll be thinking an awful lot about space on your pages and how to fit a text across the 12 spread setup of a picture book. So again, a very different kind of editorial role for picture books. You could work in non-fiction. I haven't got an example in my home, unfortunately. But if you're in non-fiction, then you'll be really immersing yourself in a completely different variety of subjects, so that you can be informed enough to work with an expert author, and also think about what would interest and be understandable for your child reader. Or in fiction, which in children's publishing means, in children's publishing it means books for children aged 5 years plus. And that's what I do. And that basically means you have a lot more words to work with. So I thought I'd just show you some of the books that I work with. This is the youngest age group, and kids are just beginning to read alone. So it's 2 colour. And it's a lot of interplay between text and image still. And then slightly older is black and white. Very spaced out letters, words, and much shorter word count, about 7,000 words. Plenty of illustrations, hopefully you can see them going through. About 50% easily of my conversations are about unicorns. This is really a huge part of my job because it's a very popular series, and like I'm the unicorn lady, I love it. So this is a slightly older sort of 7+ book. You can see the text is a bit closer together. Still lots of lovely illustrations, but a little bit less, a little more for more confident readers. This is another one from this age group, a different sort of thing, because this is author-led rather than series-led. Helen Peters is the author on this, and she generated the idea from the off, which is a slightly different kind of series process. Slightly older is, for instance, Pamela Butcher, about 7, 8+. This is a really beautifully designed book on the inside, lots of lovely illustrations. And then the upper age, where you step away from illustrated insides, and it's just basically, it could be an adult book, but it's just driven by the content that makes it a child's book. So I work on a large range. This is The Oldest Kind by Helen Peters' Ghost. So you wouldn't know it was a child's book, apart from it's slightly easier to read. So it's a completely varied job, and the way in which you work on a book changes dramatically depending on what age you're working for, which I love. And I am right at the beginning of the publishing process. So what an editor does is the editor commissions the book, either from a new or an existing author. And then always, but especially if it's a new author, we take it through an acquisitions meeting, and we have to convince the various sales teams that they think that they would like to have it, if they think it's a commercially viable idea, and they feel like it's worth getting behind. So that's the UK sales, export sales, so like the US and Canada, and then rights, which is foreign language sales. So at the beginning, we all work together to see if this is the book we want to purchase from the author. Once it's purchased and we've contracted the author for a couple of books at least, they send us the first draft. And that is really the beginning of a huge process of back and forth between us and the author. So the first stage is the structural edit. And this is fun and brutal as an editor. It's really where you're shaping the story. It might end up being a complete rewrite. You might be saying, how about we think we should probably remove this character, or maybe shine the spotlight on this character a bit more. Does this character's actions make sense? Should the scenes in a certain setting be relocated? Or sometimes it's just, there's a huge bit in the middle which is all saggy, and you have to somehow like tighten it up with the author. So it's really, I like to think of it as a helpful but really annoying best friend. It's kind of the role there. So you're just talking the author through how to make the best version of the story they've had in their head for so long. Once you get past that structural edit, it's the line edit. And that's a bit of a dance between the editor and the author, an even closer dance, because you're working on a sentence by sentence edit then. And you're really looking at their voice, which is what defines an author. You know, you could change the subject of a book, but it's really how that author writes. It's their voice that defines them. So that's a very interesting and difficult part of your job to learn. You're always learning on it, and each author is different. So, for instance, does a character sound like themselves in speeches, or is there a sweeter way to express a phrase? Just things like that. You go right the way through the book doing that. Then it's a copy edit, which is done by a freelancer or somebody else in your team, because you need a fresh pair of eyes once you've gone through all that. And they're looking for spelling and grammar errors, but they're also looking for things that you might have missed or have like crept in during the line edit. And also things like continuity issues, like for instance, someone's suddenly galloping on a unicorn, but they haven't sat on the unicorn yet, things like that. Then you set the text, and that's done with a designer or a typesetter, depending on the book that you're working on. And they will be briefing, then if it's a younger series, you'll be briefing an illustrator, which is a really lovely part of the process as well. And at the very final part of all that, once you've got your artwork in, then you have a proofread. And that is also freelance or somebody else in your team. And that's to pick up any final errors that have crept in through the different processes. And once you've done all that, then you can finally hit print, which is such a lovely mixture of relief and slight panic that you've missed something, but it's normally completely fine. And that's a lovely moment. That's the end of my job once I've pressed print. I just wanted to show you a very brief example. This is just two screens of it. So there's an illustration brief. So you work with the designer to lay out your whole book, get your pacing correct, make sure that there's an even spread of illustrations so you're not missing any brilliant things that you really want to see illustrated. For instance, a unicorn on a trampoline. And that then, once you've worked that out perfectly and got all your details in, you send that off to the illustrator. And then I have missed a stage here because I didn't get permission from the illustrator. I don't want to risk anything, but there's then you get the roughs in, and you will be commenting then on, like, does the character look correct? Is the scale correct? Have they missed a detail? You know, that sort of thing. And then you get the final artwork in, and it's a very lovely moment when you finally see all that. And then once you have finally done all your checks and the designer has worked very hard on making it all look perfect and get the text completely set with it, you get a lovely final book. This is the book, and that's the printed image. And it's always a really lovely moment when you hold a book that you've worked on. It's really the thrill of the job. So all that time, you're also working with marketing and publicity, and also working with the sales team. So you work with everybody, and it's really lovely to be connected to everybody in the company. And production, obviously, they are our gatekeeper, and they save us so many times. So yeah, we work with everybody, and it's really lovely to have all those connections and to feel enthusiasm of everybody for a project that you're working on. It's a really lovely part of my job. In terms of skills, so I think hopefully that sort of showed you that there's a lot of variety in an editor's job, and it changes a lot depending on where you're working and depending on how long you've been working as well. So at first, as an editorial assistant, I'm sorry to say that it is a lot of admin, and but you do learn to be really, really organised and to organise other people. And it's actually a really important foundation, because really a key thing to being an editor is being a project manager. Once you've commissioned a book, you have to work with sales to see when it should fit in a publishing schedule, and then you work your schedule to fit that. And that means getting the author, the illustrator, to work to a particular time frame. Make sure you've got time for your designer to do everything, and make sure that it's got time to be physically printed, which can be fairly easy in black and white fiction when you just send it slightly further north in the UK, or it could be a huge difficult problem to overcome where you're printing in the Far East and it has to have time to be delivered. So although it can feel quite arduous, because all you want to do is work with words, it actually does really stand you in really good stead later on when you are managing a lot of different projects, and you have to manage a lot of different people along a project in a way that is not annoying. So that's also another element I would say, is that you have to be a good negotiator, because on the one hand you might be negotiating with production on your repro date and lots of nitty-gritty bits, and on the other, in the same hour, you might be dealing with the author who's having a meltdown over the first draft, and you have to really help them through a moment. So I think being a good negotiator is quite a key element as you progress as well. Obviously, an excellent eye for detail. You have to spot mistakes a mile away in text and in illustration. You have to sort of do two different passes over a book. One is looking at grammar and spelling and the words, and the other is being able to step back and look across the whole spread and see if something odd has happened with image or just how it's been laid out for print. And obviously a really good grasp of the English language. And on the other hand, you get to be really, really creative, sometimes generating ideas for stories, and sometimes working with an author to think about how to resolve a plot. So it's really, I just love how varied it is. And obviously be enthusiastic and a keen reader so that you can know the market. Okay, how I got here was a fairly circuitous route. So this is a while ago now, so I think things might have changed. But I always loved art and English, and so luckily I've always managed to work with words and pictures. And I did study English at university. And after I finished that, I tried applying in a few different roles in London publishing, but I got no responses. And at the time, I did not realise that you probably should have got some more work experience directly in a publisher, rather than just varied work experience. And I couldn't afford to work in London for free, like a lot of us. So I ended up working for a magazine in Cambridge for a while, doing reviews, which was really lovely. I enjoyed that a lot. Then I worked for a children's educational charity in Manchester, writing things that supported. One of the things we worked with the Science Museum in the end, and that was lovely. And then I ran off to Ireland for a while and worked in a tiny literary press, and also did some teaching just to make ends meet, which was lovely. But I realised that I needed to make a move if I was going to do what I really loved doing. Luckily, by that point, I'd waited long enough that most of my friends had got jobs in London, and they had sofas that I could sleep on. And I mean, it's a bit of an old story, but I went to a little short course. I paid a little bit of money to go on a short course at Anglia Ruskin, and there was editors and designers talking there about children's books, and I went up to the editor and I said, I'm desperate to get into children's publishing, I don't know how to do it. And she said she'd pass on my CV, and so she passed it on to marketing and publicity, who needed a temp, and I got in through that way, a temp at marketing and publicity at Macmillan for a while. And I stuck it out on a rolling weekly contract, just couch surfing, until I was very lucky, they had a break in their editorial department, that they were promoting the person that was editorial assistant. So I applied for that role, and I'd been networking as much as I possibly could while I was in the building. so that I could like show them that I was like had the skills, I could do the proofreading whenever they needed it and that sort of thing. And luckily I got that job. And then I worked in picture books and Campbell at Macmillan for a while, and then I applied to Nosy Crow, and I love it here, and hooray. That's it.
That was a nice end to that, Fee. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the questions we've got. If it's okay with everyone who's put in a question, some of these are very specific to Fee, and that's what I'm going to focus on for now, because I think this is the most useful thing we can do. Plus, a couple of your questions are actually going to be covered by people we've got talking through the rest of the evening. So we have a question from Beth, which is who typically comes up with the ideas for books? Is it the editorial team or the authors?
It really depends. Probably it's more likely for younger series that it depends on the publisher, but it's more likely to happen for a younger series that it will be generated in-house, because it works better for chapter books to do that, and then you will find an author who'd like to work on that project with you. And then it's all for brand new authors, it's obviously always they come to you with an idea, but maybe for the second book you might be working with them more to help create a second idea. That's difficult follow-up album with them. So yeah, younger series a bit more likely, older not really.
Okay, and does it make a difference for what age group you're editing? So do you feel like it's very different to edit a 5 to 8 versus a 9 to 12 bit of fiction, aside from the amount of text you have?
I think it really is different. You're really honing different skills with different books. So well, if you think about, I mean, the absolute difference in a book like this, which is really image-led in many ways. It's not too many steps away from a picture book, and obviously you're thinking about, you can see things like we pull out words that are partly a reading aid to a child, and also, you know, because they bring out the punchline of a sentence, and you're thinking about how text and image work very closely on a page. To something like this is, you know, think about all of the little scenes in this book and the sweep of the narrative. I think it's something that I'm always learning, and you know, you never ever get bored of learning more about how to edit. And I think I don't know whether it's harder. It's definitely different to edit an older book. It's more unwieldy, I think. And obviously it's really the author. It's a different relationship with the author, and it's much more personal, subjective. I think maybe you have to really develop a relationship with an author so that they trust you in these conversations. Yeah, very different. Both exciting in different ways.
Okay, so what extent of design knowledge must you have to work on picture books as an editor? Because that's something you've done previously. Did you have to use specific programs? Did it help to have a very visual mind?
I think it helps to have a visual mind. I think working in children's publishing anyway, it helps to have a bit of a visual sense of things. Younger publishing generally, because you're thinking about how text sits on a page a lot for a younger, less confident reader. But you don't have to. You don't have to know like particular programs. Some publishers might say it's an advantage, but I don't think you would necessarily have to. You should be just working very closely with a designer so that you're having a conversation with each other about, you know, to get the best version of something. Just thinking, I think really it's the concept of understanding your reader more than understanding image. So with picture books, you're really thinking about pacing a lot, thinking about the page turn a lot, and about like whether there's always there's a third story going on in a picture book, with the words say one thing, pictures say another, and a child has a huge amount of fun joining the two and making another story which is often going on. So it's really about learning that language than not necessarily having a particularly design orientated way of thinking.
Yeah. I think there's one really quick question I wanted to ask, because I don't know the answer to it, which is how much proofreading and copy editing takes place in-house? Is that something you normally freelance out? Sorry.
It depends on, again, on the publishing house, and on your capacity, I think. If we have more capacity in our department, we will do this for each other more, because it's also lovely to see what your colleagues are working on, and it's good to be joined up on them. But if you are just absolutely stretched for time, then you would be using a group of freelancers and proofreaders.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you very much for that, Fee. That is your 15 minutes. Sorry for everyone whose questions I didn't get to ask. There's quite a few very general ones coming through, and I really want to try and focus on what it is that each individual has to say about things. But we'll come around to some of them at the very end as well. So I'm not ignoring you, just filing it for later. So the next person, goodbye, Fee, I'm going to invite in is Manda. Manda is our senior designer. She works on our picture book list. I'm just going to bring her in. And I've just got her muted.
Hello.
Oh, there you go. Hello. Hi, Manda. Sorry about that. Great. So Manda is 1838. Do you want to kick off?
Yes, I've done a little slideshow so that I don't have to be a big face on everyone's screens, because it's my least favorite thing to do. So I'm just going to pop it up here. Share screen. Does that work? Can you see my screen? Right. So my name's Amanda Scott, and I'm a senior designer at Nosy Crow. Today I was asked to kind of talk a little bit about design's role in children's publishing, as well as a bit about my pathway into it, with a brief rundown of my progression to the current role. I didn't have the most direct route into my current job, so I thought it would be worth running through my journey, but then also telling you a more typical design path to get into the job. So I studied illustration actually at Norwich University of the Arts, and that kind of means more that the emphasis on what I was learning was about drawing and mark making rather than design software, typography and layout, which is very important to a design job. But I found my whole time there I was very approaching everything with a very design sense of aesthetic, as well as applying most of my work to products and physical outcomes. And I just didn't really feel that I was going to be a brilliant illustrator, to be honest. So I told my tutors, and they suggested I talk to people and try and find work experience in related industries, the dreaded work experience. So I took a reading week while I was at uni to apply to anything and everything that said that they worked with illustrators. So animation studios, illustration agencies, everyone. And I actually got a week's work experience at Arena Illustration. I don't know if any of you know much about illustration agents, but they basically represent illustrators' interests, and they would be who we would kind of approach in a commissioning way. We would, if they're represented by an agent. Arena represent people like John Howell, who illustrated the iconic Lord of the Rings book jacket, and Alex T. Smith, who does Claude, who's a character on Disney Junior. And in just a week of working there, I learned so much about the industry. It was outrageous. And they kind of work with loads of different people. They work with Aardman Animations, and they work with advertising companies, and they work with publishers, which was like, what? Children's books? I love children's books. I had the biggest collection of children's books because I loved illustration. And I was like, I never thought that designing them was actually a job, because I thought illustrators just made the books. Yeah, funny that. I think most people kind of do. But I then went through my children's book collection, and I found out who all the publishers were of those books. And then I emailed them all. I emailed HR departments, art directors, if I could find them on LinkedIn. And I asked if they would give me work experience. Because I couldn't really find any sort of design internships as a program that was happening. And I didn't feel that, because I didn't have a design degree, that I would be able to get a design job. So I heard back from a marketing manager at HarperCollins, who offered me 2 weeks of work experience. I went and did that, and I basically spent the whole time stuffing envelopes and origamiing paper cones. It was great fun. But while I was doing that, I met a brilliant marketing designer and illustrator. Shout out to Tom Percival, who's probably not watching this. But and he was really great at answering so many questions I had about the industry. And he also introduced me to a lot of the art directors throughout the whole company. That meant I met the art director of the children's division, who agreed to give me a week's work experience in the design department. I want to kind of point out here that the privilege I had of having a brother who lived in London was absolutely crucial to that progression being possible, because 3 weeks of staying in London would have been impossible otherwise. I then just didn't leave. So 1 week of work experience then became 4 years of my life learning how to be a designer. I kind of went from that work experience to an internship to junior, and then to a middleweight designer, where I started to try and push into specializing into full color publishing, because that was what I really liked. So as I say, I didn't have the most direct route into publishing or even design. And most designers, I think, would just do a foundation degree, and then they would do a 3-year, sometimes 4-year bachelor degree, and then would just apply to junior and assistant roles. But I felt that I couldn't just straight away apply to those roles because I didn't have the graphic design degree. So I couldn't prove that I had the software knowledge that would be needed. So I kind of found a workaround to try and get my foot in the door. Then from HarperCollins, I moved to Hodder Children's Books, where I was the senior picture book designer. And then 2 years ago, I joined the Crow's Nest, and I'm now the senior designer at Nosy Crow. So there we have it. I just spent 5 minutes talking about myself. You're welcome, I apologize. But now to the part that you're probably more interested in, which is what a designer kind of does. I had to ask Google, to be honest, as well. But basically, it's kind of planning out the looks and works of something, rather than the illustrator who draws the images for it. And I think there's normally quite a lot of questions about that when I say I design them. People ask me if I illustrate the books, and the answer is no, I do not. Also, different designers do different things. Not all of us are the same. So within the specialism of publishing, we then fall into our own specialisms within the business. So Fee sort of touched on this already. We have fiction. A fiction designer would be more involved in doing the covers. So especially if they're like going up to YA, for example, or like that. And then as we go down an age group, they might be designing the insides with black and white illustration. So they would be commissioning illustrators for that. Then we have licensing. That's not something that we do at all at Nosy Crow, but I thought I would touch on it as well. And that is big brands, things like Hello Kitty or PJ Masks or Minecraft. And a designer that works in licensing would normally have loads of resources that they then create assets out of. So books out of, I guess. And then picture books, which is what I do, and I'll kind of touch back on that. Non-fiction, which is usually, it's less about pacing and the arc of stories and things like that, and it's more about slightly larger, longer texts, doing a lot of picture research, making sure you get that right. Novelty, I think Kate held up some examples of that at the beginning. Moving objects, paper engineering, it's actually an incredibly fun part of design, but a very challenging part. And then I've added marketing in here because actually people don't tend to think about that side of the design team, but some companies will have a marketing designer in-house, others won't, and they will freelance that out, or their design team will help create marketing assets. So things like Amazon banners or like mail outs and things like that. So I, at the moment, work in picture books, which I would say, you know, my role is to be adaptable to all the different ways that ideas evolve. So some are generated in-house and some come ready-made kind of by an author illustrator, and they just need someone to help them translate it into a physical item. And then sometimes it's the spark of an idea that someone's had, and then you work really closely with an editor and an illustrator and author to kind of coax that idea out. So I kind of like to liken it to being a music producer, working with a musician, that every time is different, but you work really closely with someone to try and hopefully get the product that they want out of them. So I kind of would say I idea generate sometimes. So sometimes you're helping someone come up with an idea for a book. I do the layout and composition. So sometimes an editor would get the text submitted, and then I would maybe lay that out, and then we would go through it together to make sure the pacing's working. And then finding illustrators. So that's a big part of the job, but also again, because we work so closely with our editors, we share that sometimes as well. So editors are very good at finding us illustrators as well. Project managing, keeping things on time. And then art directing, reprographics. And by reprographics, what I mean is the technical side, the setting up files that actually print and create a book that works, including things like putting special inks in and putting foil on or finishes like that. So it's quite a broad spectrum of things. I was asked what my average day is like, and I actually feel like I don't have an average day, and that's part of the excitement that I have about my job, because every book is different, and I'm usually working on at least 10 books at a time. So there's loads going on, lots of plate spinning, and they're usually at different stages of production. So, you know, one day could be lots of admin tasks, like the infinite email loop, and other days could be, you know, a lot of creative meetings, or nowadays that would be a Zoom meeting. And then some days are spent photoshopping, coming up with cover ideas, laying out text, researching topics to gather visual references, working out how to make a life-size paper mache tree. Yes, that has happened before. Designing web banners, as I said. It's kind of a job where you're constantly being challenged and asked to do new things, and no two books are the same. The skills that I think a designer needs to have is a love of illustration. I think that's really important when you're working with children's books, because we work very closely with illustrators. Good organizational skills, interpersonal skills, which kind of ties into the team player part, because making a book, one of my first bosses told me that, she said, it takes a village to make a book, because there are so many people involved in that book. And you have to work well with each other, and you have to be patient with each other. A level of fluency in the appropriate software. As I was saying before, you know, I felt I wouldn't have gotten a design job because I couldn't prove necessarily that I had the software skills. And to be honest, I probably didn't have the software skills of someone who had done 3 years of a graphic design degree. But I was very dedicated in learning and teaching myself, watching lots of YouTube tutorials. There's so many great assets online that you can teach yourself with. And then a good work ethic, because you're going to be doing a lot of it. And that's all, folks. I tried to power through it a little bit, but I still think I might have gone over my time slot. Sorry.
That was absolutely fine, Amanda. So I've got a couple of questions for you that's come through. One which actually got asked.
I stopped sharing.
Sorry?
I stopped sharing. Yes, I have.
Yeah, you stopped sharing. One which came through a while back, which was, how do you go about finding illustrators?
So again, that's always a very different time. Sometimes you might have a very clear idea as soon as you get the text. You're like, this, you know, I have a very clear idea of who would be amazing for this. Or you might have outstanding contracts with an illustrator. Sometimes it's going through agents. So I mentioned illustration agencies before, and I think that quite often they're a first port of call when you're looking for an illustrator for a project. And then I use Instagram a lot. I like to stalk people on Instagram and find illustrators that way, because it's exciting trying to find someone that maybe is new and maybe might not have representation yet. So we kind of use a lot of channels to go for it.
Okay. And another one that came through was, what do you think is the biggest challenge of designing a picture book?
Biggest challenge? Wow. There are quite a few. I think it's such a picture book is normally like an author or illustrator's baby in a way, and you're trying to help them, you know, give birth to this thing that they love, and you're working really closely, and you're constant. It's creative, and there's probably criticism involved. I know I get criticism all the time, and it's about, yeah, I think the most challenging part is working as a team to do something that you find so personal and you're so invested in as well, because everyone's really invested in making the best thing they can. So I would say that would be my idea of what's most challenging.
Okay, fab. I'm afraid that is kind of your 15 minutes, but that's been really interesting, Manda. It was fascinating having someone from Design Talk, I think. So I think I'm quickly going to switch to the next attendee, and then Manda will be back at the end in case there's any other questions which have come up.
Yeah. Okay, bye. Thank you.
Oops. Okay. So there was a quick question in there. Firstly, we will be doing, this is going to go up on YouTube after this, hopefully, if it's recording on my computer, and I'll send around an email later about that. And briefly, next we've got Sophie, who's from production. Then it's going to be Michaela, who's our rights manager. We've got Rebecca, who's publicity manager, and Hester, who's marketing. And then finally, I'll be covering sales. So that gives you kind of an idea of who you still got to look forward to. So I am going to call in Sophie. And Sophie Banks is our senior production exec. Hello, Sophie.
Hiya.
So it's 53 past and it's yours to go.
Great. Thank you, Francis. As Francis said, my name's Sophie and I'm the Senior Production Executive at Nosy Crow. I'm going to start a bit by talking about how I got into production and publishing in general. I started applying to publishing jobs straight out of uni. I didn't get a job for a while, so I was doing a few temping jobs to pay the rent while I was trying to get my ideal job in publishing. I'd only done a couple of work experience placements while I was still back at school. So when I started applying to jobs in publishing, I really had no recent publishing experience, and I applied to anything and everything just to get my foot in the door. I didn't really intend to end up working in production, and I think a lot of people who work in production will say that. I thought I wanted to work in editorial because that was the only department I really knew much about. After applying for many, many jobs, I ended up as a production administrator and assistant to the business operations director at Hodder Education, which is a ridiculously long job title. And it essentially meant that I did everything and anything that anyone needed me to do. And it was a fantastic first job because I learned so much because of that. I literally dealt with every person in the business. And so I gained an understanding really quickly of how everything came together and of all the different departments as well. So it was very eye-opening. I realized quite early on that I didn't have the skills or the patience to work in editorial, but I'd worked quite closely with the production team already. So it was a kind of logical step for me to move my career in that direction. I think the real reason I ended up choosing production though, was because of our operations director there at the time. She was so genuinely passionate about her job and about production in particular, which is what her background was. And her enthusiasm rubbed off on me. She made it seem like the best job in the world. So I worked my way up in the production team there for 3 years. And I absolutely loved it. But deep down, I'd always wanted to work in children's publishing and for a more creatively driven independent company. So a job came up at Nosy Crow and here I am. That's just a quick overview of how I got here. And now I'm going to talk a bit about where the production team sit in the process of publishing a book. I often get asked what production does, and the quick answer is that we manage the process of producing a book from beginning to end, making sure that the final product is delivered on budget, on time, and to a high quality. Our core responsibility is managing the actual physical production of the book, and we spend a lot of time talking to printers and in-house to editorial and design. However, we do deal with every department in some way or another. Our input can start right at the beginning of a book's conception, particularly if it's a novelty book, when we help to develop the product. It's our job to really understand how our printers work, so that we can then advise our in-house teams about what is and isn't feasible. Once we've got an idea of what a book is going to look like, we're responsible for deciding where to print the final books and on negotiating costs and schedules accordingly. Different printers specialize in different types of books and in different types of printing too. So it's important that we choose the right place for each book so that we get the best price and the best quality as well. Once we get to the stage where editorial and design have done all of their work and the files are handed over to us, we're then in charge of ensuring that the production at the printer goes smoothly. This includes doing several quality checks alongside our design and editorial team during the printing process to check that everything is correct and that we're happy with the quality. The last check is us approving the advance copies, and then we receive the shipping documents and we're good to go. So that's where we sit in the publishing process. And now I'm going to cover a bit about what this means on an average day. And truthfully, one of the things I love about my job is that it's unpredictable and my day rarely goes to plan. People will always be raising urgent queries or problems that I'll have to drop everything to deal with. However, generally speaking, in an ideal world, I'll email back and forth with our printers in the morning. A lot of our printers in children's publishing are based in the Far East, so we have a few hours of crossover in the morning where we're all at work. And I like to use this time to deal with anything urgent that I need to resolve with them. And then I've kind of compiled a list of average tasks that I might do on any given day. And this might include checking physical materials that come in from the printer, such as plotters. These we receive once the printer has adjusted our files to make them suitable for printing on their presses. We also check running sheets, which are literally the pages taken off the printing press during printing, and they send them to us for checking, or advanced copies of the book as well. If there are any issues with any of these materials, I'll have a discussion both in-house and with the printer to try and resolve them or come up with a plan of action about what we're going to do. I could also be working on negotiating prices or pulling finalised costs together for our sales or rights teams to use. I could be at a meeting discussing stock levels for reprints or talking with design and editorial about where we're at with files for upcoming titles. It's important we keep on top of those schedules because we have to let our printers know when we're going to send them stuff so that they can plan their production. I could be raising a purchase order for a title about to be sent to print, or organising safety testing and completing risk assessments for our books. I work on a lot of novelty titles. So, for example, a bit like this one with sliders, or something like this, which is a sound and light book. So when you press the buttons inside, it lights up or makes sound. And because of that, a big part of my job is making sure our books meet international safety regulations and are therefore safe for children to play with. I'm also a lot of the time chasing people for materials or files which are running late. It's our job in production to keep on top of where everything is, so I have to monitor the progress of all my titles to see what's running behind. This is particularly important when working on novelty titles, as they often print together as a series and in several languages at once, in what we would call a consolidated run. So to give you an idea, for some of the series I manage, this means it's over 20 titles printing at once, and it's not unusual for us to print alongside at least 10 rights customers at a time. As you can imagine, it means it's essential that I stay on top of everything and spend a lot of time in an average day just coordinating everyone on these runs and making sure all of our approval materials are sent out and approved on time. I think it's fair to say that there's always something going on in production, and it's a rare day that something urgent doesn't come up or there isn't a problem to anticipate or fix. But that is why I love it, because it's never boring and always different. So finally, I just want to talk a bit about the type of skills you need to work in production. Firstly, I would say organizational skills. Like, you're the person that makes sure everything goes to plan, so you have to be the organized one. Good communication skills, because during the physical book production, you're the line of communication between printers, rights customers, and your in-house team. So you need to be a really clear communicator, especially as for most people who aren't working in-house, English isn't their first language, and it's really easy to misinterpret what people are saying, and for them to misinterpret you. You need to be able to multitask and prioritize. Your work is always going to be interrupted by something else going on. That's probably more important. And you need to be able to prioritize tasks and be comfortable juggling several things at once. You need an eye for detail, because you'll be checking physical materials, so you'll need to be able to pick up on any issues. And you need to be reasonably competent at basic maths, because nothing too complicated, but you'll be working out unit costs, differences in currencies, percentage increases and decreases, and that kind of thing. And I think that pretty much concludes my whistle-stop tour of the production department.
Thanks for that, Sophie. That was interesting. I enjoyed the bit about basic maths, which I think as anybody interested in publishing can seem a bit, but
It comes up.
Yeah, in sales too. Thanks, that was really interesting. Actually, you covered off a lot of the questions that we have been asked. There's one which I'm enjoying at the moment, which is, how have you had to adapt to your job during this coronavirus crisis? What changes have you had to make to keep going?
Well, I mean, it's pretty interesting working in production during coronavirus, because we deal with a lot of physical materials. So I've had to look at quite a lot of pictures and videos of like advances and running sheets to approve them, and also take more responsibility myself for approving stuff, because in the office, design and editorial would also look at the plotters and the running sheets and the advances, but often I'm the only person now being sent these materials, so I have to take that responsibility, and sometimes also ask the printers to make calls about colour and quality that we would normally make. I've also, like many people, had a lot of Zoom calls to speak to people about where we're at with books. And my utility cupboard is currently a book storage unit for all of the books and materials that I keep getting from DHL. I know him personally now, he comes every day. So
it's something interesting that publishing is obviously still such a physical product-driven industry. I mean, there's nobody here who hasn't had a stack of Nosy Crow books on hand. One other thing I was just interested in knowing, and it's often not a controversial question, what's your favourite meeting that you have every week?
Oh, I'm not the biggest fan of meetings, Francis. Probably, I do actually find our stock meetings very interesting. So every week we have a stock meeting which basically assesses print runs for upcoming new books, and also for any reprints that we might need. We look at the stock and work out when we need to order. It's always, for me, an interesting one, because it kind of, although I'm there to advise on print schedules and what is and isn't possible, it's kind of outside of my expertise. So I always feel like I learn something in those meetings about who is buying our books and kind of where they're going after I've finished with them.
Yeah, excellent. Great. So I think unless anybody else has got any questions they quickly want to send through, I think that was all. Thanks so much for that, Sophie. That was very well organised, as I'd expect. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, and next up we now have Michaela. Michaela is our Senior Rights Manager. And I have just promoted the wrong person. Sorry about that, Michaela Callahan, whoever you are. I'm really sorry about that. Right, let's try this again. Here we go. Right, so this will be Michaela P, who's our Senior Rights Manager.
Hello.
Hi, Michaela.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Michaela and I work in rights. And when Frances asked me to speak in this event, and as every time I have to speak to somebody in public, I get very, very conscious about the fact that English is not my first language, as you will realize from listening to me. This makes me really, really worried about all the mistakes I might make and things I might say wrong. But actually, if I stop and think, the fact that I grew up in Italy and that Italian is my first language, and that I speak a bit of French and Spanish, and traveling the world is what I love doing, I think this is what makes me a better rights seller. So starting from what rights is, what we do is we sell translation rights to publishers outside of the UK. As Kate was mentioning in her introduction, co-edition and translation rights selling is a huge part of our business, because a lot of our revenue comes from outside of the UK. And it is particularly important in children's publishing because of something that Sophie was mentioning just before me. She spoke about consolidated print runs. So in order to make children's publishing work and to be able to print books like this one, for example, which has felt flaps, these books are really, really expensive to make. So what you have to do is you have to try and use the economy of scale in order to make these books cheaper to print. And because, as Frances will tell you later, she has a number of clients in the UK, but often they cannot cover a huge amount of copies. They cannot order 50,000 copies of Where's Mr. Puffin? So what we do is we try to coordinate a huge print run, which puts together Frances's orders, as well as my orders and my colleagues' orders from Spain, from the Netherlands, from Greece. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the printing and the selling of these books more profitable. So another kind of rights, so this is one of the two kinds of rights you can sell. So this first one is co-edition rights, and the other one is translation rights. So what you do is you give the publisher the right to print themselves the book. So what we do for the co-edition is we print for them. And what happens if we sell translation rights is we give them the files, they pay us a royalty and an advance on the royalties, and they do all the printing and the distribution themselves. The reason why we're able to sell these foreign rights to publishers is that we have first bought them from the agent or the illustrator or the author. So what we do as a rule at Nosy Crow is we buy world rights. And that is really, really important because you can only sell the rights that you have. So what you get is this huge wallop of rights that you then pick and you sell them separately to all the publishers that are able to reach into those markets, and they have the language and they have the knowledge of that market, and they have the distribution system, which is why we would never sell directly Portuguese copies in Brazil. So the reason why I'm talking about co-editions is also to explain to you what's needed in a rights role. So because, as Sophie was saying, you have to be on top of things. You have a lot of copies printing together, different languages, different quantities, different prices. What you need to have is a keen eye for detail. You have to be very good with admin. You have to be very patient in making sure that you are keeping track of what's been sold, where, to whom, what's been submitted, if you have sent a copy, what kind of material you've sent. Have you sent just a PDF or a physical copy? So that's really, really important. And you also need organization skills, because what we do to sell rights is we meet clients at fairs around the world, or we go and see them into their offices. So you need to make sure you can organize a very full schedule of meetings, and normally when there's not a pandemic going on, we go to fairs in Bologna and Frankfurt. We also go to Beijing and Shanghai. And this year we were planning on going to Guadalajara in South America. And when we go to fairs, we have a stand. We have something like this, which marketing helps us put together. This is a rights guide. And we have all the front list titles that we want to show to our customers. So design would put these together using marketing kind of coordinating everything. So you need to know how to arrange a schedule, how to book flights to get there, but you also need to be very, very physically abled because you need to drag around very heavy suitcases full of books. Especially in children's publishing, you can't just think of pitching a book without showing it. So often we just really go around the world with a suitcase full of books. And those are 23 kilos that you have to drag around up and down the metro in Paris or the trains in Korea. So that's something you need, but you also need to be a very personable person. You need to be able to communicate effectively to people. You have to create a connection. The thing that I love about rights is that you're meeting a customer that then becomes, often they become friends. And especially I was thinking about this pandemic and how being in touch with my customers and exchanging experiences on how it's going on, how we are coping with this. It made me feel really, really connected. Yeah, I think you need to have both this admin side of you and this kind of very chatty and bubbly personality. That is really, really key. Another thing I often get asked is, do you need to be able to speak a foreign language in order to work in rights? You don't have to, but it's a proof that you have kind of an understanding of the world outside of the UK, and you have a sensibility for other cultures and for other languages. This is because, and we need this because often, especially in publishing houses like Nosy Crow, where it's a team, it's a small team, and everyone feels able to contribute. You have a say as a rights person. You have a say on what's published. Or on how things will be published. For example, if I go to a covers meeting and there is something that looks particularly, if there is a hot cross bun on the cover of a book, I'm the one that raises her hand and says, we should try and avoid that kind of thing on the cover, or in general, we can just say, this is a book that will be mainly for the UK market and will not sell particularly well outside of the UK, which is also fine. Sometimes we do that. We're working on a book which will talk about British personalities, and I'm sure I won't be able to sell it anywhere, but sometimes books are worth publishing even if you don't have the kind of secured sales abroad. And how I got into rights, I didn't know what rights was before starting. I wanted to work in editorial, and I did an MA in publishing. And I was doing the children's module, and I decided that I wanted to work at Bologna Book Fair, which is the biggest fair for children's publishing. And my tutor said, oh, well, if you want, I can try and send some emails to publishers and see that if they need a hand. And Nosy Crow needed somebody on the stand. And at the end of that experience, I got my assistant job, and then I just stayed, and I've been here for 4 years. So I think that's me.
Thanks, Michaela. I like that finish. I stayed and I'm here. So as also you've done a lot of your own questions and answers. Is there any particular educational background you think is advantageous for rights jobs? And I mean, I think in a way you're a useful person to answer the question about MAs in publishing, because I know some of us here have them, some of us don't. You do. Do you think that's essential?
Well, I think personally it was useful for me to get contacts, because we're not surgeons. This is not a job that you have to, you know, study years and years and years to do. If you just jump in and you do your best and you have a passion for books, you learn the job by doing it. So you don't necessarily need an MA in publishing to learn that. But as a foreigner, I did try to get some work experience before doing my master, and I just didn't get any replies at all. So that for me was a way to, you know, have that link to the industry.
Yeah. You were talking earlier about languages, but of course you're actually also learning languages. I think that's something the Nosy Crow team, I mean, do you know how many languages you've got between you?
Yes, okay. Italian, a bit of French, Spanish, Catalan, a bit of Chinese. Am I missing anything?
No, I think
Company. We used to have Greek. No, we have Greek. Stella speaks Greek. Yeah, I think languages are really important. Just they help you create that connection that I was telling you about before. If you're able to speak to somebody in their language, it makes them just feel more comfortable in, you know, sharing their opinion about the book with you. Or oh yeah, Bulgarian, Russian, yeah. Kate is popping up with other languages. Yeah, so I think that's why the language is helpful. But also, yeah, sometimes it's interesting to have so many languages in the company, because on a normal day, Kate would, you know, come up and say, hey, how do you say that thing in Italian? Do you have that play on word? Do you have that same kind of metaphor? Because often children's books are they are based maybe on a play on word, or I don't know, leapfrog, or
Lionel and the Lion Share.
Yeah, or the early bird catches the worm. Do you have that? Do you use another animal? And obviously, if you use another animal, it's really hard to sell the whole book if the you know, the protagonist is the bird in the end.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. I think that's about your time. This has been very interesting there, Michaela. I'm sure there'll be some other questions. There is also somebody who is keen to buy some rights for some books in Arabic, and I'd suggest they go to rights@noseycrow.com.
Yes.
There you go. If you could go to rights@noseycrow.com, that would be fantastic. Right. Cheers, Michaela. So you'll be back a bit later. Fab. Thanks, everyone. So next up, we have Rebecca. Rebecca is our publicity manager. So she'll be telling you a bit about a typical day in our publicity department.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, so yeah, I'm Rebecca. I'm our publicity manager at Nosy Crow. I thought I would start, as everyone else has, by talking about how I actually got into publishing, which was by a slightly unusual route in some ways. I was lucky enough to go to uni to study English, like lots of us. And I knew from quite early on that I wanted to work with books. So at that point, I thought publishing was entirely editorial, and that's what I thought I'd do. So during my uni holidays, I got an internship at Penguin Random House, working in the marketing and PR department. I'm originally from near Liverpool. I went to uni even further north, so I tracked down the person I knew who lived the furthest south to stay with them for that fortnight, which I was so lucky to have. And I got a taste of what it would be like to commute to London for 2.5 hours a day. But it was worth it. It was an amazing experience, not only practically, but because it gave me an insight into all the other stuff you can do that's not editorial. I realised quite quickly that that wasn't for me, but I did really love doing the marketing and the PR stuff and getting to do all the fun things. So yeah. And then after uni, I kind of hit a bit of a crossroads. I was offered 2 jobs. One was in publishing, but magazine publishing, working for a small company based in Kent, and one was for an engineering company based in Manchester. I really wanted to take the publishing job, but the pay was, as it often is for entry levels in publishing, really low, and I couldn't afford to move down to London or Kent on that little. So I took the job at the engineering firm, working as a technical author, and then later as a communication specialist, which was different. But the plan was to like save money, move down a bit later, which I then did. And then once I was down, I could apply for jobs much easier, go for interviews, mostly for children's books roles. And I got my first job in publishing, which is here at Nosy Crow, as publicity and marketing assistant. So really, I was so lucky with the opportunity as I had to do things like the work experience. But hopefully it's worth knowing that totally different work experience or not doing your dream job straight away might not be a bad thing. Sometimes those things that make you strange, like working in an engineering company beforehand, make you stand out. So you never know. Yeah, so I started as PR and marketing assistant, which is because as departments, PR and marketing sit really closely. We plan a lot of campaigns together and our aims are pretty similar. So I started off working as an assistant across both. But doing that job, I found my strengths and interest lay within publicity. So I moved specifically into this. So pretty much figured it out as I went along. And I've been doing that for 3 years now. So yeah, in publicity, marketing, and probably sales as well, Francis would say. Our job comes when the books are well on their way to being done. So when all the editors and the designers have done their magic, and we start thinking about how we can get as much positive attention to the book and the authors and illustrators as possible to sell as many copies of the book as we can. So if there's a timeline, we're probably towards the end of the publishing process around publication. I probably start thinking about a book about 6 months before it's published. The editors will introduce us to the book and to the authors, and we go from there. So I start working really closely with the authors and the illustrators, and we become their kind of like point of contact, which is a huge part of the job. So making sure they feel looked after and heard, and also because they're a really great resource for promoting their own books. They know it better than anyone. Yeah, so publicity covers quite a lot of different stuff. Day to day, there are a lot of different things that come up. It's a cliche to say that no day is the same, but there are a lot of different things to juggle, and that's a key skill, I would say. Basically, it's all about getting positive attention and creating a kind of buzz or excitement around the book and the author and the illustrator, so you become like a champion for the book, the person who's going to shout about it the loudest and fight for it. So that involves a kind of traditional publicity, so pitching to journalists, reviewers, bloggers, for reviews, for features, for interviews. The best kind of coverage is like the cover all would use you can get. So in children's publishing in particular, there's barely any space in traditional print media, so like newspapers or magazines, for children's books. For instance, The Times has a Children's Book of the Week slot, but most national newspapers just do a monthly summary or a seasonal Christmas books guide, which basically means that every publicist out there for every new children's book is fighting for those slots. So it's good to be passionate, it's good to know the books and what makes them special. It also means that PR involves a lot of admin, especially at entry level, from designing press releases to sending out a lot of books. We send out a lot of stuff. Yeah, so nowadays social media plays a big part. We have really close relationships with a lot of bloggers and Instagrammers as well, and we're always on the lookout for things we can do to stand out and new ideas. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples, if I can. Yeah, so I think that works. Yeah, so for instance, last year we published a book called I, Cosmo, which is from the perspective of a dog. So we were trying to think about what we could do that's a bit different, and we reached out to loads of doggy influencers to basically see if they could write reviews from like the dog's perspective, which worked out great. We had loads of pictures like this of the dogs reading the proofs, and we had some like big dogs share lots of covers and that kind of thing. So that was great, and also a great excuse for me to spend my time looking at dogs for a while. And then we have a lot of room for that kind of creativity and to kind of solve challenges as well. We published a really big book last year called The Suitcase, which I think you might have heard if you were here 5 minutes before the webinar started, to tie in with National Refugee Week. And there was a bit of a communication issue somewhere, and we ended up in our department without very many early copies of the book. And normally we would send out loads to try and get lots of attention and excitement, which we didn't have in this case. So instead we came up with the idea to make these little model suitcases, which we found for like a template online for about £1.20, and designed to look like the little suitcase on the cover of the book, and little cards, and you know, just try to make it look as fun as possible, as you can kind of see in some of the pictures. It took a lot of time to make them all, but it went down really well. There was lots of photo sharing. This one that says, "This is brilliant marketing," is my personal favourite. But yeah, so it's a fun example of the kind of creative thing we get up to. There's lots of kind of opportunities to like try new things. Another thing that normally plays a big part, and normally because it hasn't in the recent pandemic, is organising events and going to the events. So you can be in and out of the office all of the time, going to different things. Events are one of the ways we connect children directly with the books and the authors. So, you know, we plan book launch parties to celebrate new books. We do lots of visits into schools, we visit libraries, we do bookshop signings, we do panel events, we do story times all over the country. So it's great, but it's super busy. So it's a great chance for us to get the author out there, to sell copies of books, to get them to meet the children face to face. We also do a lot of conferences with librarians and teachers to exhibit the books and talk to them, because they are like not only direct links to the children and super passionate about the books too, but they are big influences for like awards and that kind of thing, and it's great to have them on side. Award submissions, actually, while I'm on it, are something else that we look after in PR, like you know, submitting for the Costa or the Waterstones Prize, and that's something you'd look at from quite early on in a PR career. You know, you get that kind of opportunity. But yeah, so festivals are another big thing. You might have heard of Edinburgh Book Festival, or Bath, or Cheltenham, or Hay, or Oxford, or one of them, but there are loads of them all over, and they are brilliant. They are a massive support to us. We pitched the organisers to get our authors there, and we work with them on building events that work and sell tickets and books, and we try and create the best lineup possible. This is kind of where admin comes in again. There's lots of train ticket booking and hotel arranging and schedule planning and making sure there's somewhere for someone to have lunch and all that kind of stuff. Basically, you have to kind of plan for everything in PR and anything, just in case it does come up, so that you can make it look super slick and organised, and make it as easy as possible for the authors and illustrators to just kind of do the key bit. Time consuming too. It means that often, you know, you're traveling, you can work on evenings, you can work on weekends, but it is one of the best bits. You're not stuck in the office all the time. You get to travel to lots of places, you get to work with the authors and illustrators and build up really close relationships with them, and you get to see how the children are reacting to the books and the joy they get out of like bringing a stack of like loved books to meet the author. And it's so nice. It's such a lovely feeling when all that work comes together and it pays off. Yeah, so yeah, it's quite outward facing. At these events you always see friendly faces, lots of publicists know each other, you're all on the same circuit, you're going to the same festivals, so it's lovely to always be able to catch up. You get to meet a lot of really interesting people who are all just as passionate as you. Normally in the office I sit near Frances, so she definitely knows this, but it's a good thing to like chatting and publicity. But yeah, so those are the main things, like reviews and coverage, working with schools and libraries, events, awards, but a lot of it comes down to caring about the book and caring about the author. So my day involves a lot of emails, some of them with completely unexpected requests. But it's great to work so closely with us administrators and build friendships and have the freedom to try new things and have fun with it. So yeah, it's great. I think that's kind of me.
Great, thanks for that, Rebecca. I think you're very much the PR person. You're very smiley and happy. It's nice. So I've got a nice question for you. Yeah. So how much of your day is spent on social media?
So probably, I don't know, maybe it depends on a day-to-day basis, but I always spend my lunch on Twitter really, and Instagram. Twitter mostly, because that's where we see a lot of our trade reactions and schools and libraries and stuff. So I spend a lot of time nosing at what other people are doing to try and get good ideas. We are looking at reactions, we're looking at what people are talking about, we want to keep on top of that. So I always check over lunchtime, normally in the morning, as like a general rule, just to make sure you're on top of everything. But I work really closely with the digital marketing team, so they kind of sit slightly separately from us. But as you can imagine, there's lots of overlap. So if we're planning a general campaign and we want to do a big thing on social media, or to do a cover reveal, or to do a blog tour or something, that kind of sits with us to organise and them to help pull off. So there might be a day that I spend my whole day on Twitter looking at stuff with that team. So yeah, I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah. I think this one's quite interesting. How has your role changed from assistant to manager?
Ooh. So I do slightly less, obviously, marketing stuff now. As an assistant, you do a lot of admin. So there's lots of mailing things out. There's lots of award submissions. There's lots of like creating press releases. And as a manager, we work as a larger team to plan things. So I would say I spend a lot more time on the overall strategy of things. So thinking about like planning the campaign from start to finish. So it's my job to come up with the entire plan and work out a timeline for it and when we're going to do it. And as an assistant, you would probably focus more on parts of those things. But as you kind of progress, you will get more autonomy for looking after small campaigns yourself. So I mean, at the moment at Nosy Crow, we look after pretty much everything in-house, apart from a few exceptions. So, you know, you might get a book to look after yourself, and you get the freedom to do that from quite early on, and then you will build up to bigger and bigger books. So it's got a lot more to do with making the kind of bigger, wider decisions, I would say, and working really directly with the authors and illustrators, you know, going out to lots of events and stuff. But one of the great things about PR is while you're doing all that admin stuff, you are still going to the events yourself. You work closely on, you know, if it's an ideas thing, you know, anybody can have an idea. So yeah.
Fantastic. And a quick one for you, which I quite like. What's been your favourite marketing campaign of the year so far? I don't know if that has to be one of ours or something you've seen.
No, I was just going to ask that. And that's a good question. Of 2020.
Well, go on. Last year, last count, like last 12 months.
Think of a children's book. A friend of mine looked after The House with Chicken Legs, which was a children's book, which I think was actually, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, but I love the campaign they did with that. So Sophie Anderson, I think, who's the author, she was a debut at the time, and they did so much with it, and I was so impressed with it because, you know, these conferences that I kind of mentioned earlier, I met the author really early on, and it was like, I don't know, 6 months before the book was published, and she was there handing out proofs to everybody and talking to them face to face. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, they really think this is going to be a really big book for them. They're really planning ahead. But all through that campaign, you know, they covered like every angle. They were there. The author was front and center of everything. Which as a debut is quite a lot of pressure. You don't always know how an author is going to feel about doing school visits and events, or, you know, personally handing out their book to people. But she did all of that, and they had amazing stuff in the bookseller. They had amazing point of sale. They did beautiful proof packages when they sent it all out, and it's kind of kept going and going and going. They've done amazing events at Waterstones, and it's also a really good book. So yeah, that's one to recommend. That's been great. It's lots of stuff. Yeah, I love looking at all the adult stuff they do as well, because it's slightly different. But
Yeah, fantastic. Right, thanks so much for that, Rebecca. We are now going to move on to Hester, who is our marketing manager. So bye, Rebecca. Oh God, I've done it again. Sorry, I shouldn't be allowed to do this. I'm just promoting random people to panelists. Sorry about that. Right, let's try that one again. All right, hello, Hester.
Hello.
So Hester is our marketing manager. Take it away, Hester.
Hello, everyone. So I thought I'd start off with how I got into publishing. And it's a little bit predictable, really, but I did study English at university. And to be quite honest, I didn't actually really think about what I wanted to do afterwards. So what I first did was I was an office temp in a call centre for a little bit, and I was looking for jobs specifically that were related to my degree in some way. So I really wanted to use my language skills. And the first job that I got was actually as an editorial assistant for a publisher of catalogues and event guides and directories, which basically included proofreading a lot of phone numbers and addresses. It wasn't riveting stuff, but it did give me some really vital experience in working in an office, for one thing, but also using software that would come in really handy later on. From there onwards, I actually worked for a number of different publishing companies, many of them quite unusual. For example, I worked for a book distributor. So essentially they sort of sold books from America and Canada into the UK market. So that was really interesting, and that was a marketing job. I also worked for a museum in their publishing department, and you'll be so surprised how many different kinds of publishing jobs there are out there beyond what was initially in my head, which was I want to work in adult fiction, basically. And across all those jobs, what kept coming back to me was the opportunities I had to work on children's books. And I always loved that aspect of every job that I had. And that was when, about just over 3 years ago, I got a job at Nosy Crow. And for me, it was just amazing to be able to work full-time on children's books. Not only that, but work for an independent business as well that was a lot smaller, and it feels like you could really make a difference and also see how everyone works in different departments. So it took me a while to kind of get to that place, and I was trying to think about what would be useful for you guys, and the fact that you're already here and interested in learning is already such an amazing step. For me, it was a case of it's okay not to know what you definitely want to do from the very beginning, and that you can actually learn as you go and find the right fit for you. So I hope that's useful. So just to give you a bit of an overview about marketing and publishing, basically my job is to tell the world about Nosy Crow's books. And I think you guys will already know a lot about marketing purely because you are a consumer, like we all are. And you've probably made decisions about what you're going to buy based on things that you've seen or heard from companies. Hopefully that isn't too creepy, but you are surrounded by marketing each and every day. It could be that the sponsored post pops up on your Instagram. It could be the advert that you see on the side of a bus when you're walking on a park. It could be the print ad in a magazine. It could be someone hands you a flyer. It's even things like packaging or special offers that you see at the supermarket, that you are surrounded. So open your eyes to that whole world and you will learn a lot. And all of these adverts are not coincidence. And I think it's really interesting to think about why that company invested their money in communicating with you at that particular time and place. For me, working in children's publishing, marketing is really interesting because the reader of Nosy Crow's books are children, but the people who buy the books are grown-ups, their parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles and all sorts of different types of people. So when you're thinking about marketing to consumers, you're thinking about both of those audiences. Marketing to children is obviously quite limited because there are a lot of ethical reasons behind that. But it is totally possible as well. There are so many brilliant children's media out there that it's really worth researching if this is what you're interested in. Things like The Week Junior and radio stations like Fun Kids Radio. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a taste about a campaign which I loved working on and kind of shows you the full range of marketing activity that you could be doing when working on a book campaign. So just bear with me while I share my screen with you. Okay. Okey-dokey, bigger. So this is a campaign for a book called I'm the Seed That Grew the Tree. It is a magnificent poetry collection. Absolute delight to work on as a marketer. As you can see, the visuals are beautiful. And I'll quickly run through all the different activities that took place over quite a long period of time. In terms of planning, we were thinking about this book a year ahead of its publication. And for all of the pieces to be put together, it took months and months and months. So I'll start off with some of the really obvious marketing activity, which is things like print advertising. So for this Christmas campaign, we advertised in different newspapers because we really wanted to reach those gift buyers around Christmas. And the same applies to outdoor advertising, which both of these you'll be really familiar with, as I said, because you're absorbing them all the time. And, you know, we put a lot of thought into who we wanted to work with, even down to which stations would we like this to appear in. All of it is very orchestrated and well thought out. The bits that you might be less familiar with are things like trade advertising, because obviously it's really important for us to reach out to the book trade well ahead of the publication date. And the bookseller, which you might be familiar with, is our go-to for reaching all those booksellers and buyers out there. So we advertised on their front cover, and we did that way ahead of the publication again, because people are thinking about buying in books well ahead of time. The other aspect of a trade campaign is thinking about how the book will appear in a shop. And so POS is point of sale, and those are printed materials that you put together for a shop to create a display. And this, you can see we've got things like bunting, we've got posters, we've got these standees here, we've even got a tote bag, and all of these things really contribute to building a strong presence for a book in a shop and make you notice it even more. As you'll see here, window displays are just really what you want for a book campaign, because everyone walking past will notice this book. And Fran, the illustrator here, designed some gorgeous windows for us. She painted on the windows directly and was an absolutely fabulous asset for creating these beautiful displays. The other thing is that we work with schools quite a lot, because they're really important customers to us as well. And the kind of things that we can do with them is that we create resource packs. So these are lesson plans focused on the texts themselves, and we offer those to schools for free, with the hope that then they will order lots of copies of the book in order to present the book and the lessons to their class. We took it one step further by launching a nature poetry competition. And this again was tied in with the pack, and we had a brilliant prize, which was that Fran, the illustrator, would illustrate your poem for you if you won. So all of those creative ideas helped engage lots of pupils across the country. Social media, obviously so important. As Rebecca was saying, we have a separate digital marketing team, but they created so many beautiful things for this campaign, from video trailers to sharing audio from the poems, to lots of beautiful photos across Instagram and Twitter. And the last thing I included, just for fun, is chocolate, because chocolate obviously is delightful to receive, but it also just shows you that so many things out there can be part of a marketing campaign, and it is you can be really creative in the kind of freebies that you can give away to people. I just wanted to quickly show you this as well, just so that you get a sense of what goes into preparing a campaign and how many different activities happen over actually quite a long period of time, which I think is quite useful to see. And referring to this, I work really closely with Rebecca in PR, and there's been quite a few questions about, you know, what's the difference between the two departments. And on a very basic level, it is that all the activity I showed you before is paid for, but there is a lot of crossover, especially on social media. And I think in some previous jobs I've had, actually the marketing and PR roles have actually been combined, and so that's quite a natural fit, especially in smaller publishers. The other thing I just wanted to talk about really briefly is brand marketing, because I think it's something really important to consider if you're interested in marketing, but also even if you just are interested in applying for a role anywhere. Nosy Crow has a really distinctive look and a really strong signature red colour. And I think if you'll notice, the decision to include the logo on the front of every book is a really important one, and is a great signpost to customers that this is a Nosy Crow book and it's a sign of quality. I think you'll see branding everywhere. You could look at the Nosy Crow website, from, you know, the catalogues that we produce tote bags and even tablecloths. It's really important that customers recognise us instantly and that we build a long-lasting relationship with them. The reason I think it's important when you're applying for a job is that it's so helpful to get to know what a brand's values are and what their tone of voice is and what they're all about. And I think when applying for a job, it's so important to keep that in your head, even things like writing your cover letter. So I think even if you're not interested in marketing, it's still worth a look. My day-to-day can be quite, I know everyone said this, such a cliche, it's very varied. But really a marketing job, you do have to be quite a jack of all trades, because you could be writing briefs for adverts, which you then send on to a designer and work really closely with them on visual material. On the other hand, you could be proofreading catalogues and other materials. Again, the editorial skills that I gained earlier on in my career were really useful for that. You are liaising with printers and various suppliers. Again, basic maths, very useful. You're going to be getting in quotes, you're going to be comparing quotes, and, you know, other skills like planning and strategizing are really important, and learning to work within a budget. You as well, interpersonal skills are really useful because you'll be meeting lots of other businesses and partners to work with. There still is a lot of physical mailings that we do to booksellers, so the envelope stuffing still there. And it's also, you'll be working on a lot of different visual material, so you'll be creating and even sometimes designing very basic sales material like order forms and flyers. So I think it's quite a varied job that uses quite a lot of different skills. I think good assets to have would be to be creative, be able to kind of think about interesting ideas or new ways in which you can communicate with your customers. I think attention to detail is very important, as with all jobs really, but especially with marketing, when you are kind of checking copy that is then going to be made public. Things like advertising, you know, you don't want your tube ad to have a typo in it, basically. Being organised is also very useful because you will be managing projects, sometimes multiple projects and campaigns at once, often with a lot of different people involved. And I think particularly it's useful to have an interest in design, because not only because you'll be working really closely with designers, but also it's so useful to have an idea about how things look and have a strong opinion about that. I think copywriting skills as well, very important, because you have to come up with quite punchy lines for advertising and blogs and various other places. I also think it's quite useful just to be interested in the industry and sort of keep an eye on what everyone, sounds creepy, keep an eye on what everyone else is doing, but it's so valuable to research what other companies, not just publishers, are doing in terms of marketing, and just to absorb, as I was saying before, all those all that marketing surrounding you is really helpful. I feel like I've been talking really quickly for a long time.
One quick question for you, Hester.
Oh yeah.
So it's one that we were asked. How do you measure success of a book campaign?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, so digital marketing campaigns are brilliant in terms of getting results, because you will get all the vital stats from social media. So in terms of engagement rates, click-through rates. I mean, even as you know, Francis, with Amazon, you can tell how many people are actually going to buy the book based on what you've done. I think some of the activities that I do in the more traditional side, it's really, really hard to be able to gauge success. One of the things you can do, it's really basic, is run a competition. And that's why so many marketing companies run competitions, because you will know how many people have entered, and that is your measure of success. So if you ran a competition and 2 people entered, you'd be pretty disappointed. So that's one way you can do it. The other way is that in a sense, when we are booking adverts, we're thinking really carefully about things like the circulation of the newspaper, who the demographic are. And I think in a way, preparing that in advance is actually very useful. The other thing is that you can see who's talking about your advert on social media to some extent. But I do think that it is actually really difficult with an outdoor campaign. I can't tell you 100% we sold 500 books as a result of that, but I can tell you potentially 1 million people saw that ad. So I think it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, great, thanks for that, Hester. I'm afraid we are slightly running out of time, so I'm going to have to call you short there, but you're all back at the end if there's any other questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Right, so I am actually your last presenter as well. So last one, I've got 5 minutes, it'll be fine. So my name's Frances. I am the Senior Sales Manager here at Nosy Crow. And I think one of the reasons why I set up this evening back last year was kind of the answer to the first question of how people get into publishing. And it's because, like everybody else who's spoken this evening, it feels like, one of the first things I thought was, well, I want to work in editorial. Of course I do. And I think from the outside, that was because I sort of thought that was how the books got made. And it was this single process where editorial would buy a book, they'd make it, they'd decide what the jacket looked like, and then they'd publish it. And everyone else was kind of ancillary to that process. And I would say one of the first things you learn about publishing is that that isn't the case. So I personally first started actually in production. I went to a day that Penguin used to hold, which was a bit like this, where you'd go in and they had people talk to you about all the different roles that they did, and they talked about whether or not they did work experience. And I remember sitting there with this piece of paper, and the lady who spoke about production said, oh yeah, we advertise for work experience, and nobody ever applies to it. And I was like, production, got it. And luckily I had a degree in Chinese studies, and actually a lot of, as Sophie said, a lot of production is done in the Far East. So I kind of used that as my in, and basically badgered them for work experience until they actually had an assistant job come up, which I interviewed for and was lucky enough to get. I then did production for about 6 months. It was just a temporary role, and that was at Puffin. And I then, at the end of that, I kind of quite suddenly came to the end of my contract, and I went for the only job that was currently going in Puffin, which was sales. And it wasn't somewhere I ever thought I'd end up. I'm not a particularly chatty person. I'm not a big sort of loud person normally, but it's turned out to be a very fortuitous turn. Sales is fantastic. I worked in sales at Puffin then for a year, and then I came to Nosy Crow 5 years ago. So in that time, I've obviously gone from what I started as a sales support coordinator to I'm senior sales manager. So sales it's one of those great departments that sits really across the whole scope of the publishing spectrum. So we often first start in the publishing spectrum at editorial will either buy a manuscript, they'll be considering a manuscript, they'll be looking at authors, they'll be looking at design, will be looking at illustrators. And one of the first things you've got to know is this going to sell? Because at the end of the day, if a book doesn't sell, the publishing company's not going to be making any money off it. If a publishing company is not going to be making any money, it's not going to be a publishing company for very long. And obviously that's a very sales perspective. But so yeah, so you start really at the beginning and thinking about books and where are they going to sell. We have a lot of different markets that we cover in sales. So I work in UK sales, specifically with the supermarkets, online and special sales. But then we also have export sales. So we sell our books in English around the world. So we both do rights, which Michaela was speaking about, where we translate the books and sell the rights to them. And then also we sell just the English language books to all sorts of English language schools and libraries and expat communities around the world. So we have those different departments. We also then have specials, which is a name for any sort of area of sales that it's not the books you'd find on the high street generally. It's things like Scholastic, who sell directly into schools. You might remember the Scholastic book fairs would come around when you were a kid. It's also people, I mean, like the book people who went under before Christmas, they sell packs of books. So they're a different sort of deal and you'll have to approach them in a very different way. But yeah, so I mainly sit at the moment, it's supermarkets and online sales. Obviously, with everything that's happened with the coronavirus in the last few months, online sales and supermarkets have been some of the few channels in the UK that we've still had selling books, which is kind of, it's made what was already a fascinating area to work in just that more so, thinking about, you know, are we doing our best for our books online? Are we displaying them correctly? Do we have the right sort of marketing going on? Are we getting the right titles into supermarkets? All of these sort of questions. So we start, yeah, so sales sort of starts with that acquisition stage, what are we publishing? And then you're involved in the whole process. Michaela mentioned covers meetings as well. It's one of my favorite questions. What's your favorite meeting? It's definitely covers meetings. We have it once a week. And editors and designers bring their ideas for a book jacket to a meeting and we all have to sit there. And I'm there to represent my accounts. I'm sat there going, is this book going to sell in the supermarket with that jacket? Are people going to pick it up off the shelf? Are they even going to notice it on the shelf? We, Asda always used to do a presentation every year where they said that most people walking in an Asda by the bookshelves would look at the books for 3 seconds. You have to imagine, what can you do to make sure a book is seen on those shelves in 3 seconds? And often, you know, it means more commercial titles, it means bright colours, it means making it really clear and simple. But then we're balancing that against what the designers want, what the editors want, maybe with what rights are after. Their customers might prefer something a bit more arty. Maybe we're talking about what do Waterstones want. So it's kind of, it's this point where you bring together all these different ideas from the different areas of publishing and try and come out with something that works for everyone, which isn't always the case, as Michaela mentioned as well. But it's very interesting. And then, yeah, the actual sales itself, we spend, so before all of this, I would spend at least a couple of days a month traveling to see customers. It's quite glamorous UK sales. You get to see an awful lot of business parks. Asda are up in Leeds, which is lovely. I've been seeing Morrison's in Bradford. Tesco's are out in Welwyn Garden City. And you go and you talk to a buyer, basically. You're there very much to have a conversation. I often think sales puts people off because they think it's going to be like sort of the Apprentice. You're going to be stuck in a room with 3 people sat in a row and you've got to like perform. And it's really not the case. I do quickly have an example. This is the sort of presentation we would show to people. We start off, as Hester said, with the clear branding. And what you're doing is you're going through, so in this case, say it's July to September, and you just have your titles. And we're here to talk, we're here to start a conversation. So if I go to see Asda, I'm super excited about Where's Mrs. Queen? It's a new title in our Felt Flap series. It's going to be great. And I know it could sell really well for them. And it's about talking to them about that. But it's also about saying, what do you think of the cover? Is this going to work for you? Do books about the Queen work in Asda? I don't know all these questions, and neither does anybody else at Nosy Crow necessarily. But that's why we have these conversations. And it means that maybe they say, oh my God, we love books about the Queen. Do more of those. And I'd take that back and feed that into our publishing program and go talk to one of the editors and be like, Turns out there's a real need in the UK for books about the Queen. I mean, it's an example, but you can see that it's a process, it's a conversation, and it's about getting as much out of them as we're giving to them, because our buyers, whether they be at Asda or in a sort of really lovely bookshop down the road from you, they know what people are buying. They know what actual customers on the streets and in the shops are picking up and choosing to buy. And that's an invaluable source of knowledge. And that's one of the reasons why I love working in sales, that you get that access to that. And it's your job to feed that back into the wider company to make sure that we're making the right decisions. So you can see this is obviously a board book. We have great presentations. Where's Mr. Soldier? Here he is. So you can see this is quite fun. This is how I've been doing all of my presentations throughout coronavirus, which has been quite different. You obviously have to sort of approach things differently. If you're talking about a novelty slider book, it can be quite easy to sort of show how fun it is. The words aren't, you know, necessarily that complex. Sometimes it'll be a song that they know. And then you can have something like, I mean, this is a middle grade fiction we've got, where there's so much more to it, and you have to give a quick summation of the plot summary without getting carried away. You've normally only got an hour to really go through that entire list and do it all justice. And that's really tricky. It's quite a lot of pressure when you know how much time and work and love people have put into these books. It's really, you feel that sort of real pressure to make sure you're doing it as well as you can. But that's fun. So day to day, I mean, I think we spend, as I said, we go out on trips if we can. And we also spend a lot of time, so doing grids. There is an awful lot of grids in sales, a lot of time in Excel. So I'd recommend anybody interested in sales, think about their Excel skills. That's a really simple thing you can get easily done. And so we spend a lot of time on grids. We spend a lot of time emailing people and talking to them and finding out what they think, what they like, how are things selling. Like we get reports every single week of different books, how they're selling, where they're selling. I manage Amazon, and from them you get a fascinating level of detail. So I run all the marketing on Amazon, and I can literally see that we've had 10 people this week buy The Girl Who Bought an Elephant because they've searched for the words girl book. And it's just so interesting. You get to see this sort of insight into how people are thinking and how they're finding books, which is, again, invaluable information, especially as we move to a point where loads of people, as Kate said, are buying books online. We've got to make sure we're advertising them and we're sort of flagging them to the people who would be going to look for them. Because we know what we do. We're publishing fantastic books. We want to get them out as far and wide as possible. So yeah, I spend a lot of my days doing that, and yeah, and then presenting and talking to other people in the publishing process. We spend a lot of time with production. We manage stock as well ourselves, so we get to sit down at some point about 3 months ago already and decide what is going to sell how much for Christmas. So we're sat there looking at these fantastic new books, and we just have to, I mean, we forecast, you know, you think about a similar title from last year, you think about what else is coming out in the market. Is there going to be a lot of competition in this sort of area? When we had something like I Am the Seed, which Hester was telling you about earlier, coming out, we're going, this is fantastic. We've got this 366 page picture book, like hardback picture book that's this big. We know there's nothing else like that on the market at the moment. So we knew we had a really big moment for this book. And that's a fantastic feeling, knowing that the publishing company you're working for is doing something really innovative and novel. And it's exactly the same with the felt flaps that you'll have seen a couple of times. A few years ago, you couldn't find a book with a felt flap on the market. And we've sold bucket loads since because of that. And then it's interesting, you get to watch other publishers come out with them, and there's that competition, and it's all about thinking about what's next, keeping an eye on trends. If anybody in a meeting says, you know, oh yeah, I've seen a couple of books like this, it's like, should we be doing that? Is that something we want to do? We're not going to copy anyone, but it's interesting that there is this trend towards this and there's this trend towards that. So yeah, I think that's most of my job, I'm going to say briefly. And yeah, sorry, I should have said, so then when you work in something like export, it works really the same. It's sort of a cross between rights and sales in the UK. Except you just tend to get on a plane. You get on a plane and you go see your customers. And again, you've got to decide, what do your customers want to see? If you're going out to the Middle East, maybe you don't have a book with a pig on the front. That's one of our biggest things we come across. So it's a lot about, again, understanding the culture that you're selling into. So for me, that's just the UK. And for overseas people, it can be for the different countries around the world. So I'm just going to have a quick look to see what questions there are. Skills you would recommend developing if you're interested in sales. I mean, you do have to be passionate about books. You've kind of got to think of sales as a job where you spend a lot of time talking about books, which I'm sure most people here, if you love books, you love talking about it. And then also knowing how to use Excel, as I said, is really helpful. and you've got to be organized, same as everybody else. I've got to know that if I've got 60,000 copies of a book, if I've accidentally sold like 20,000 to this customer and 5,000 to that and 10,000 to that, we need to get a reprint in. And you've always got to be on top of things like that and thinking ahead. And that takes up a lot of your time. And do we work to targets within sales? Some publishers do. It's different, very much different places behave differently. I think especially if you're working with one of the sort of the bigger publishers and like a Share or somewhere, you will definitely have targets to work to. As it is, I mean, we always have targets, and I can tell you exactly how many books I want to sell on Amazon this year. But I think it becomes part of some books are going to sell really well. They're going to sell fantastically in a supermarket. Some aren't, and that's great. We publish books that maybe will sit better in Waterstones, and so you might have different expectations for different titles. Is what I would say to that. Great. So I think, unless there's any other particular questions for me, I'm afraid that was quite a whistle-stop tour of sales. I'm going to quickly invite the rest of the panelists back in. We don't have a huge amount of time because I'm aware they all have evenings to get to. But just to see if there's any other questions, and especially actually Kate, I'm inviting you back in. If there was anything else you wanted to address quickly. Sorry, Kate, did you hear me on that one?
Oh, if there was anything else I wanted to say. I mean,
Yes.
I thought that question about being targeted was interesting. Obviously, we have, as a business, we have a budget, and we have a per title budget. If that question was about whether we as individuals have targets for selling, I don't really think that's how Nosy Crow works. I think that one of the things I hope has come across here is how collective the experience of publishing a book is. And so the idea that that selling rests on the responsibility of, well, one, or the sales success of something is the responsibility of one individual, isn't really how I think our lives work, or our publishing lives work. We are making a lot of very collective decisions, I think. Does that make sense?
No, I would agree. That's almost what I wanted to say, but I was worried about saying I just didn't have targets, because I do. But we all know where we're going as a company. I think that's really important to our culture at Nosy Crow.
I hope so, but I just don't think it's useful to say, oh, you know, because you could we might make a stupid decision about a cover, and there's no point in saying, well, that's Francis's fault, because it's not Francis's fault, it was a collective decision.
Yeah. So if anybody else has any questions they'd like to ask quickly, I'm putting this out to anyone out there. I may have missed some way back in the questions, so if you quickly want to ask them again, we do have a moment now. Okay, how important is having a bookstagram or a book blog for getting a job in publishing? I don't know, Rebecca, Hester, I feel that's one that slightly sits within your remit.
In my point of view, I think it's never a bad thing. You know, if I see that on a CV, it shows, you know, that you are genuinely really interested in the books, and you've got kind of awareness of what's going on, like what other people are talking about. You're reviewing books, and in some senses you have a perspective from the other side, what reviewers are looking for, so that can be really useful. It's not by any means essential, so don't feel like you have to rush off and go and start a blog, but if it's something you do, yeah.
Quick one that we do get asked quite a lot, is doing a publishing MA worthwhile? Who has one here?
I do.
Okay, well, I'd say that's an interesting start to the answer there. I mean, I would answer that one, Georgia, just that I think this would hope that you would show that there are a lot of different ways in. And I think what everyone always says about the publishing MA is it definitely gets you connections and you're into that sort of community quite quickly. But I don't know. I would maybe say that's up to the individual. I've certainly hired people with and without publishing MAs. All right, Hester.
Very expensive, and there's no guarantee you get a job at the end, I'd say.
Yeah. Sorry guys, if any of you see a question that is directed to you. All right, Kate, what are
Loads of
Nosy
questions.
Crow's business goals for the next 6 to 12 months?
Keep going in very tricky circumstances. Keep taking those bags of post to the post office when I'm in the office. I don't know, it's extremely hard to say. We've obviously had to make financial projections. I hope we will maybe end this year slightly ahead of last year, but with a slower growth than we have seen historically. We've done a lot of selling ahead of time. The nature of co-edition selling in particular which is what Michaela's responsible for, is that it's very, very far ahead. So 2020 looks okay, honestly. What will happen in the context of very serious, I think, economic challenges for the UK and elsewhere, looking forward into 2021 and 2022, I think that's much, much harder for us to assess. And I think one of the advantages of being, I mean, it's a disadvantage being small, because you don't have some, massive big bag of corporate cash to dip into when the going gets tough. But one of the advantages is that we can be reasonably swift moving. And I hope that we will be able to be flexible and responsive to the circumstances. I hope that we'll end up in a better position than at the end of this year. We work to a calendar financial year, so January to December. I hope we'll have sold more books and made a bit more money, which we'll put back into the business immediately, which is what we always do with the profit we make. I hope we'll make more in 2020 than we did in 2019, but that is far from a given. Who would have thought in February, and maybe all of you, because you're all brilliant virologists, but who would have thought that we would be sitting here today and not in Nosy Crow having this conversation face to face if we'd asked the question at the end of January to ourselves.
I think
it's very hard to know.
I think in a way the fact that the whole world is our market is our advantage, because different countries are at different stages in this crisis. So it has been, for example, we have seen how Asia was so far ahead of us, but that meant then when things were stuck here, I was able to keep selling to China or Korea or Japan. So I think that is really helpful for us.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. And this is not a political webinar, but I think that the UK, it is fair to say objectively that the UK's death rate per capita, kind of by population is not, it does not make for happy reading. And there are other countries that we sell to that have managed this significantly better. And they are thus economically less badly affected than we are currently, and that we are likely to be in the UK.
Yeah. I do quickly want to address, there's so many questions coming through, people asking about how to apply for jobs in publishing, how to get jobs, especially if you can't afford to do internships, or especially things that are unpaid or even low paid jobs.
I have said that we pay the living wage to interns when we run internships for precisely in order, in answer to somebody else's question, precisely in order not to be in Manda's, to have people not had to be in Manda's situation, or I think Rebecca talked about this too, where they were unable to be in jobs without having, or they were unable to get work experience without having friends or family who were in London already. So we do pay interns.
I think as well to all the people.
And I think most companies do now, on grounds that I think it's illegal not to, but some people I think do a tiny bit manage to swerve that. We do not.
I think as well to the point that a lot of people are asking about how do you, there's loads of people here wanting to ask Fiona how what she looks for in a CV for editorial. But I'm not sure that's quite something you'd have an answer to. But I think my massive piece of advice would be try jobs in different areas. I think that's sort of what this evening was about. But if you're trying to
read your CV, really read your CV, because it's amazing the things we see in editorial that haven't been proofread.
I think that is a really good point. Most of us will be writing outward-facing copy, copy to people who are not within the organisation. So whether that's an email or catalogue copy, I think that it is sort of a given that you do have to have a pretty good grasp of grammar and spelling and punctuation, because we're selling our skills at being able to put together words and pictures, but words too. And so I think that that's a really important point. So if we see a covering letter or a CV that hasn't been well proofread, or isn't, you know, it is messily expressed or has got errors in it, it probably won't make it past that first hurdle, I'm afraid.
Great. Right, I'm very well aware that I've taken up a lot of your guys' time this evening. So I think that's about all time we've got for. But yeah, thank you all so much. I really hope everyone listening, this has been helpful to you. I'm sorry we haven't got around to answering all the questions. I've been trying to do this as well as I can, and there's been quite a lot going on. But if you've got anything burning you want to ask, a lot of us are on Twitter, or if you email me, you've all got my email address, and I can try and parcel that out to the right person. But yeah, thanks so much for all of your time.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you all.
Thanks, Frances.
Thanks, Frances.
Thanks, Frances. Yeah.
Thanks all.
Goodbye.
Hope you all have good evenings.